once you understand the essentials of what we're doing here, it basically just goes across all the other stuff you're going to be doing. So this isn't a follow-along assignment, because by now you've already understood the basic steps of what we're doing. And it's just kind of like taking those steps and applying them in a different way. Okay? So here's an example of okay, so all I've done here is I've animated one of these things doing that. I'm going to make my screen a bit brighter. Here's a cool thing inside of After Effects. You may be familiar with adjustment layers from Photoshop, where you can put a layer on top of stuff and do adjustments, and it affects everything below. Same thing inside of After Effects. So I make an adjustment layer, there it is, and then I can go to something like color correction, and I can go to exposure, or I can go to whatever, and it'll apply to everything below it. So if I'm trying to brighten up everything, there I go. I've just brightened up everything, even though the projector's not showing it. Let me take my gamma correction up. I guess that's good enough. Okay. It's kind of washed on the projector, but whatever. There we go. So I've animated one of these things swiping across the board, and then what I've done is I've duplicated it and then just offset it. Okay? So you get this effect of that. All right? So all the stuff that you're going to see is similar to that kind of thing. The biggest thing is kind of planning out what you want to happen. Obviously, we need to know what's going to happen so we can plan for it at every step of the game. All right? So there's one. Here's another one that I did. And I'm just going to copy that same adjustment layer just in case the projector decides to not show it very good. Okay? So this one is just circles. And I just had them expanding out. And again, it's the same exact thing that we've done. It's just animating this circle, literally just scaling up, and then adjusting some speed graphs, getting that one circle to look good, and then duplicating it. And you can see down here the offset. You can see how this is the start of it. Right here is where this layer starts, right? And then the second layer starts right here. And the third layer starts there. And the fourth layer starts there. So I've just offset each one. Yes, ma'am?
So then the smallest one is on top.
Mm-hmm.
Are they all filled, or all the ones other than the first one a stroke?
No, they're all filled. They're all the exact same circle. Okay? And if I were to just turn off all of them except for one of them, there it is. Okay? So it's just those stacked on top of each other give us that look. Okay? That's why it's kind of important at this stage with this kind of assignment to really go through and play with it, because it's not like the Angry Birds one where we have to do a lot of planning and a lot of design work before we even get into this. With this one, I've created a circle and I've animated it, and this took me like 5 minutes to do. Okay? Once you have the foundations and understanding of it, much easier, much simpler, much quicker to do. So I don't want you to get lost in trying to do everything perfect the first time. Just play. Okay? Play on your first one, play on your second one. By your fifth one, you should really have something that's cool. Okay? That's the point of doing 5 of these, that we have something that's a bit cooler. Here's another one. And again, let me paste my adjustment layer in here. Okay. Now this one's a bit more complex because I've taken the same principles from the first and the second, and now I'm implementing them into something a little bit further. And it might be hard to see some of this, especially right there on the projector. Let me take my exposure and really crank it up. Ooh. There we go. Okay, so now you can actually see, if I zoom in here, that those bars that are spinning around it are not just static bars. I'm going to turn off my motion blur. They're not just that, which could look cool in and of itself. But I added this motion blur on top of it just to kind of give it a little bit more dynamic movement, okay? Just to give us that look that something more is happening than just like, bars moving left and right. Okay? Now with this one, you'll see if you look at my layers here, that some of my layers are not on. You'll see like this one, there's nothing on here, there's nothing on there, and then these eyes, the ones right below it, actually look a little bit different than the other eye. This is a standard like eye that you would see in Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign, but this eye is actually like filled in, okay? And that means something inside of After Effects. These ones that are turned off, you'll also notice that if I were to, let's say it's turned off, let's say I deleted this, you can see it kind of ruins my animation, okay? Now, even though it's turned off here, it's still being used for information, okay? After Effects is using information from that layer to do something to another layer, all right?
What is that layer?
This layer is actually called a mask layer, okay? So think of like in Photoshop, we have layer masks. That's what that layer is doing. It's becoming a layer mask for the layer below it. So here's my lines right here, okay?
So you're saying by making it a layer mask that those things that it makes those things there visible, but then if you, so you can put that into something else and it's just like that.
Right, it's cutting it out. So like these lines that are here, see how those lines are not going through this right there? They're not connecting to that. Let me rewind it so you can see them popping out. Okay, and we go frame by frame. You can see how it just kind of grows from that point. What's actually happening is it's growing from the center. From this point, it's growing outward to make that line.
So that mask
Is hiding the rest of it.
is only the surface.
Yes, so it's hiding this little circle around here, so I don't see that. Also, the center of this circle, I'm going to disable those masks. So I'm going to just say no track matte, no track matte. And then you can see what the result is. You can see how this just looks kind of blah. It's just kind of everything's connected, not very interesting. So if I turn that mask back on, now I can cut that out. And if I turn this mask back on, now I can cut that out, okay? And again, understanding how to do this obviously is essential, but then also how do we edit these kinds of things? Where do we make changes to make it look different? If I wanted this line to be thinner, I could go into the parameters for this outer circle and make that thinner, or I can go to the parameters for the mask and make that thicker, right? So if I go to here, and I go to my shape, and I make this bigger, let's say 250. Oops, that's too much. 240. There we go. I've made that just slightly thinner, right? And then if I go to 245, you can see I've made it even thinner. Just by editing the parameters of the mask, I'm changing the shape of it, okay? And this one actually has, if I zoom back out of this, I actually have several different layers that are going into making that. That's a different one. Here's my lines here. So that's what the lines look like before they're put inside of that. And here's what the actual lines ones look like. I just have a single line, and it goes 90 degrees. And I just rotate it, okay? So always try to think, too, what's the smart way to do this? Instead of me having to go through and draw all of the lines going around it like that and animating all those lines and rotating all the lines, sometimes it's just simpler just to kind of break it up into chunks. Now, I actually probably don't need that one there. That's the last one, whatever. Okay, so let's get into, I have one more that I'm going to open up just so we can see that. This is Blips 02. There we go. Ooh, fancy. Okay, so you get the idea. What was in comp 2 here? There's comp 1. All right, so I'm going to go to a new project and don't save. Okay, so just like our other projects, we're making a new composition. Everything that we do is going to be at that 960 by 540 setting. Okay, so every composition you're going to make is going to be at that 960 by 540, unless it's for a specific reason of why you would not. But that's basically going to be it. We're dealing with square pixels. Our frame rate we can leave at 2997, or if you want to just round it to 30, that's cool too. And then for the duration of these are not meant to be long. These are just meant to be like blips. Like it just like bloop, there it is and it's gone, okay? So typically you want to stay within like 5 to 7 seconds, and then you can tweak it from there. So I'm gonna go with 5 seconds, And then for my background color, just so you guys can see it a little bit better, I'm going to make it a little bit in the grayscale region. Okay, so there's our starting point. So now for this one, what's the first thing that we should do before we do anything? We can save it. That's a good idea. Save as. Okay. Now we also want to make sure as we do stuff, where is my P drive? Sarcona 2200. Work. I didn't recreate my folders in this one. Like we did last time, how we had the project folders, right? Oops. Project. For this one, we're not going to have a lot of outside material. We're not going to have like images and movies, and you might have audio if you want to add audio to it. But typically, you're not going to deal with a lot of extra artwork type things like we did in the last one. Okay. Everything we're going to create is going to be stuff that we've created inside of there. But we may want to do a reference folder just so we have some reference that we could also pair along with this. Okay, so I'm going to save my stuff inside my project folder and onto the P drive. And there's my blips. Okay, so now after we get our project folder set up and we get that stuff saved, our first step should be planning out what we want to do, okay? So the easiest one to start off with is just doing like lines, just kind of swiping across or swiping up or doing whatever, okay? So we're gonna, there's several different ways to do this. We're gonna be using what are called shape layers, okay? So up at the top you see there's a little rectangle, and that is where all your shape layers are created. Now shapes themselves can all be part of one layer, or they can be part of their own individual layer. All right. So if I go in here and I create a rectangle, and then I create another rectangle, and I create another rectangle, you can see how I still have one shape, but it's adding, or one shape layer, but it's adding different shapes to that specific layer. Okay. So you have to be aware of that, because if I started scaling up that one layer or scaling it down, it's going to do it to all of those. All right. So I'm going to undo that. If I wanted to create its own layer, I would drag it, and then I would click down here to click it off, and then I would drag a different one. And now I have two layers, shape layer 2 and shape layer 1, that are independent of each other. Okay? Sometimes you will want one shape layer to be in the same thing. Think of like a gear. A gear might have like a circle shape, and it may have little sprockety things in there. It may have a circle in the middle, and all of that stuff is going to be moved as one shape. Perfect. Do it inside there. But for this, we don't need that. All right. Now the other thing is if I double click on this, it creates a default shape. Okay? And the default shape will just fill this entire thing. So if I wanted to create, let's say, a perfect circle perfectly centered, I could go to, oops, delete the layer. I can go to the ellipse, double click it, and it'll create an oval. Then I can come down here to my ellipse settings, the ellipse path, and here's the size of it. You can see that the size automatically says 960 by 540. So then I can just uncheck the link and change this to be 500 by 500. And now I have a perfect circle perfectly centered. Okay? Now the other way to do that, just so you can see why I'm not doing it the dragging it out method, is that if I go in here and I drag this out, okay, and I, maybe I get it right there. Now its pivot, its center is not right on. Okay? So I could play with it, try to get it centered, blah, blah, blah. It's much easier to do what I just said. You double click it, round it off, and you're done. There we go. All right. So on a shape layer, it's a little bit different than our other layer. If we were just to create a solid and we started to open and expand the layers in here, we wouldn't see this one that says contents. And the contents is where that ellipse is going to be housed. It's a good idea if you do have more than one, just for future reference, to go ahead and name these individual shapes. we can just hit enter and then type in sphere or whatever you want to call it, okay? If you have more than one. Sometimes you will have several different shapes going into the same layer. Okay, so there's our item here. Now we do have a fill up top, and we have a stroke up top, and we have some stroke width. It is a good idea before you start doing any coloring on this is to go out and try to find some good colors. You can use Cooler if you ever use cooler.adobe.com, and this allows you to, oh, they changed it to color now, color.adobe.com. They allow you to go through and pick color patterns, pick colors that are linked to each other, pick colors that are pleasant or to be around each other. Sometimes people just pick, you know, like this bright red because that's the default, and they leave it like that and it looks horrible. So you can go in here and you can pick different color patterns, okay? So as I move this around, you can see the different patterns that I'm picking here, and I can pick different rules about how it's picking those colors. Okay, so if you're not really good at picking colors, here's a good spot to go to kind of get started, because these colors mathematically work together, okay? Now it doesn't mean you'd want to use all the colors. You may only use 1 or 2 or 3 of the colors inside your document. You may want to use like a dark blue, bright blue, and then this brown, just to kind of help give some accents in there, okay? You may want to do different shades of the same color. So now here's the one color that I'm picking, and it's just doing shades of that specific color. There's also, you can explore, and here other people's color themes. These are themes that they've picked out and they think work together, and if you like one, then you could obviously use it. Look at that one, white. Adobe Ideas theme, it's white. So let's say I liked this one here. I could say, get the info for it, and then I could save this image, and then I could drop that like into my documents, bring it into After Effects, and actually use it as my color picking method to get my colors, okay? So for this, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it as it is. But just so you're aware of it, that I'm just going to kind of pick some random colors now, but I would go through and pick out nice colors that blend together. You don't want to pick colors randomly. You don't want to be, yep, that's a good color for this one, and then the next one's a totally random color off of there. I actually will do, I'll pick a good color to start with, and I usually like this blue because it's just that typically it shows up nice. And then I'll use these numbers here, and I'll just kind of round them off. So 210, 60, and 90. And then all my colors I pick after that, I base off of those colors. So I may go like from 210, I may go to 160 because that's 50 units lower. Or I may go to 260 and it's 50 units higher. Or I may cut my saturation in half or cut my black value in half. Okay, so that's just how I pick colors. Now you'll notice that, there you go, the white line is super thin, okay? So always try to look at this at 100%. On my projector, it's not showing me the full screen at 100%. With dual screens, slide that other screen, this screen here, you can just pick it up and drag it over to your other screen, and you can see it at 100%, so you don't have to worry about, you know, not seeing that white line if it's super thin. Okay, so I'm just gonna make it thicker just so we can see it for now. But again, all of these things that we're doing can be adjusted later. We can always tweak these kinds of things. All right, so I just put that to 10. Good, wonderful. All right, I'm just gonna set this to 50% too, just so we can see the entire document. All right, and there we go. All right, so what I wanna do with this specific shape is I'm gonna take it and I just want it to expand. Okay, it's gonna start from nothing and just expand. So scale is the most likely choice. Okay, we scale it from 0 up to 100 or whatever we're doing, and that's usually a good starting point. So the first thing I do is I set it to 0. It's gone. I click my little scale stopwatch. I go up a bit, let's say 1 second, and then I put it to 100. Okay, so now I rewind it and hit play, and there it is. Okay, now I know that my work area for this is going to be here for this specific one. Everything that I want this sphere circle to do, I want to set up perfectly on this one circle so that when I duplicate it, everything works on all the duplicates. I don't want to duplicate it now and offset it and then look at it because it's not going to give me the right results. So I'm going to take my work area, I'm going to shrink it in, and then I'm going to hit 0 on my keypad. Okay, so what are we noticing about this circle inside here? Speed, right? It's just kind of like static, just like the same speed throughout. So I want to adjust that. So to adjust that, we have this graph button right here. Okay. So before we get into the graph button, just so you can see what the defaults are going to do, I can grab each of these and hit. My recording software's F9 is to pause the video. So that's what F9 was doing. So I'm going to ignore the F9 and just right click and go to Easy Ease. And that will ease out of this keyframe. It'll go fast and it'll ease into that keyframe. Okay? Okay, so that's what that's doing. And you can see it's definitely has a little bit different look to it. It doesn't look as static as it did before. Before it was doing linear. It was going from point to point. It was just going bloop like that. Now what's happening is it's slowly scaling and then scaling really quick and then slowly scaling at the end. Okay? Now I could speed this whole thing up just by taking my keyframe here and scooting it back, right? Because if I take my keyframes and push them together, it should go faster. Okay? So now we're getting that where it's actually looking more like a blip type thing. Okay? Like I said, this should be kind of quick and kind of exciting. I'm going to pull it back a little bit further and see what that looks like. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is actually go in and look at the graph. I want to see what this thing is doing. So I click on the graph button, and it's showing me the graph. Now right now I'm editing the values. Okay? So what this allows me to do is I'm seeing the specific values for it. So I'm going to hit Fit to Graph. There it is. And what this shows is down here on the bottom right, this little point right here is my first keyframe. That's at 0. Way up here at the top right, that's my second keyframe, and that's at 100. Now as I take these and start to pull them this way, I'll even pull this maybe like that. What should happen here is that we should get very little growth, and then all of a sudden in the last half of this, it should just kind of like shoot up. Okay? So I'll hit 0 again. And that's what it looks like is happening. It looks like it goes really slow at the beginning, and we can frame by frame it too. You can see I've gone to, here's the first frame, so that's 0. Very little movement, very little movement, very little. And now we're starting to basically jump to bigger numbers right at the end, okay? Because of how that graph is set up. Now just to kind of exaggerate that further, I'm going to really crank this down like this. There we go. So we should have essentially nothing until the very end, and then boom. There it goes. Boom. It just pops right on the screen. And it's still growing, and we get that look, okay? Now some people like to edit with the value graph. Typically I do. I work in 3D. In 3D we just have a value graph. There's another graph. Oops, too far. If we right click, we can show the speed graph. Okay? And the speed graph is showing us the speed. How fast is it getting from this keyframe to that keyframe? All right? So I'm just going to turn my graph off for a second and just reset these keyframes back to this. I'm going to hold Control and just click until we get back to the default. There we go. All right, so now my velocity for this, the speed that it goes from one keyframe to the other, is straight. Okay, it's back to being linear, so there's no change at all in how fast it gets from one point to the other. Now if I take this one and I pull this one down, okay, so now it's going to be going at 0, very slow. Okay, this is the speed here. So it's going to go from 0, and that's going to go really fast to get to there, and that's going to kind of peak out at that point. Okay, So right at the beginning, it kind of just goes really quick. I can take this and make it exaggerated again a bit further. Okay, so now we're back to where we were at the other one, where it is kind of going a little bit slower and then kind of jumping at the end. All right, it will take your brain a little bit of time just to get used to using the graph and how these things are connected together. So again, like I said, this is a play one, so go ahead and play with it and see what happens. Just for fun, if I take this and I pull it below that, oops, always zooms too far out. You can see what happened there. It actually went backwards, okay? So it looked like it was growing and then going like this. It was actually scaling the opposite direction and then coming back out because I went below 0. 0 means you're not going fast at all. You're at 0 miles an hour, right? But if I go below 0, then I'm actually going in reverse. So it was scaling it backwards and then scaling it up. So again, it's just something that you have to play with just to kind of wrap your brain around the specifics of it. Okay. Now this means it's going to go really slow, and then at one point it's just going to spike, go really fast, and then it's going to start to slow down again. Okay. So that's what's happening here. Now again, we're looking at this over, 15 frames or so. If I stretch this out even further, like, a second in 15 frames, it might be a little bit more apparent at what's happening. And you have to be careful too, because sometimes when you move keyframes afterwards, it does this funky stuff where it dips below that line. And sometimes we have to just reset those tangents. Control click it, come back in, perfectly straight, and then we can reset this. There we go there. Pull that across. Okay. Let's give ourselves a little bit more time at the end. Okay, so you can see how it kind of slows down right at the end. I can pull this one way far down like this, push this like that. So what we should have now is super slow. It spikes and gets to its position and then slows down again. So we're going to go slow, fast, slow. Okay, and you can see it really clear on this one because we've stretched it out a little bit that it does go pretty slow at the beginning. And then it speeds up like halfway through. It speeds up and gets us there, and then it slowly grows that last little bit. Okay? So again, it's something that you have to play with. You're really in your brain with your head and all this, just kind of figure out what's happening with those. Okay? That's the gist of it, is that this is showing you the speed. Like I said, I prefer the value graph because with these handles, I can customize it based on information that's already in my brain about how these things work. So with this, with the value graph, no movement at all or very little movement, then it's just going to spike at the end. Okay? There we go. All right, so I'm just going to take this back to 15 frames. Just tweak my graph slightly. There we go. And I'm just going to shrink my work area down. There we go. Okay, so I'm happy with that movement. All right. Now, once you're, again, accustomed to kind of using this, all we've done here is I've created a shape, set a couple keyframes, and just adjusted the tangents. That's all I've done. Okay. Obviously, it took us longer, so we're explaining it, but it shouldn't take you that long once you kind of understand the foundation of it. Okay, so I'm happy with that movement right there. I'm happy with how that's scaling up. So now I can take this and start to duplicate that shape to create my other iterations. So I'm just going to go Control D a bunch of times. Okay? So now what I have is a bunch of shapes. I have 11 shapes, exactly in the same spot. Okay, so all of these are exactly the same thing. I hit play, nothing's different. Okay, everything does the exact same thing because it's all right on top of each other. Now I can go through, let me click off of this. I can go through each one of these and just kind of step it like this. And step that one, and step that one, and step this one. Okay, but I have to make sure that whatever I've offset the one, if I want them to stay the same, I've offset all of them the same distance. There we go. Okay, so now let's see what that looks like. Okay, so just by doing that little offset, that exact thing, we get this kind of neat effect, right? It's kind of cool. But now let's say I wanted to offset each one 2. Well, now I have to go back and move each one 2 units over instead of 3. Well, it's kind of like annoying to do. So let's make sure we're reset back to there. Yes, we are. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to grab all of these, and I'm going to go to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to overlap all of these. Okay. I grabbed them all and I went to Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. All right. So this will allow me to overlap each one of these. Now I have to know each one's duration. Okay. So initially we set this up to be 5 seconds. So if I went and said I want the overlap to be 5 seconds, I don't get anything because they're already overlapped 5 seconds. Okay. But if I go in there and I say I want them to be overlapped 4 seconds and 30 minus 2, right? 28. Now look at that. We get this stair stepping. Now you'll see that this stair stepping started here. So this is our first one, and then it went that way. This isn't going to give us anything different. It looks exactly the same because my layers are out of sync, right? I want the bottom layer to be my last layer shown, or my top layer to be the last one shown. So I'm going to grab these in this order. Okay, and I just use Shift for that. And there we go. Okay, so now very quickly I can offset each one 2 frames. Okay, that might be a little bit too much. Holy cow, that's crazy. But here's the cool thing. I just undo it once. That's it. And then I can just go back to my Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers, and then just change this to maybe 26, okay, instead of 28. Make this my work area a bit longer. All right. Now this one's just kind of for the sake of this assignment or sake of this demo. I just duplicated it 11 times. This is actually probably overkill for what we wanted to do. Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. But here's something else that we can do with this. Is that we can change how each one is interacting. Okay. So remember before I said I can use a layer as a layer mask. That's what I want to do. So here is the first layer, right? So here the first layer comes up right there. And then right here at the center, that one there, that's my second layer coming on. Well, what if I said I want to cut out that second layer? I'm going to do that. So inside of this, there should be one of these menus that says Track Matte, okay? And in Track Matte, you basically need to set it up with the layer above it, okay? So it's just like in Photoshop, the layer above it can be a mask. So I'm going to go into my Shape Layer 1, because that's the one I want to have something cut out of. I go to the Track Matte area, and I'm going to say I want to use the alpha channel for that.
You didn't do the thing.
All right, you have to wait then.
You didn't offset.
So you'll see in this one, I now have that one cutting out the other one. Okay? So with this, you'll see that we get a little layer mask icon right there. This is using the inverted matte or inverted alpha channel from the layer above it. All right? And if you click on this alpha matte and it does that, and you're like, that's not what I wanted to happen, let me try the other one. There we go. That worked. Okay? That's all you have to really know. There's an alpha channel. It's cutting stuff out for you. So that's all we have to know. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to every other layer and do the alpha inverted. Okay, and the very last one is not going to have one. That's fine. Okay, so now we're getting a different look to this. Okay, and that's very cool because we can apply this anywhere. I could then take this and I can grab both of these layers, let's say, and I could just scoot these over here. I can grab both of these layers because they're all linked together, so I want to make sure I grab them together. And put that there, grab these two layers, move them over here. Let me pull this up a little bit further. Grab these two layers, put them over here. There we go. So now we're getting this kind of like bubbling effect, right? Where it looks like bubbles are popping. And at the end we have a circle, okay? If we don't want that circle at the end, I just hide that layer and it's gone. Okay, so you can create some very, very cool things with this. Now there is a white line happening at the end of this. I can go to, let's see, this here, and I can just take this stroke width and put it to 11. There we go. And the reason for that is that these things are right on top of each other, so that very edge pixel is not showing very nicely. So I just take the mask and just expand the mask one more pixel. Okay, so all of these ones here that are my masks, I just make that 11. And it should be gone. Come on. That one's 11. That one's 11. 11. Why didn't you disappear? Oh, maybe it's not there yet. Yep, there we go. Yep. Now when I zoom in 100%, you'll see that there is nothing there. When I'm zoomed out at 50%, you can still see some little haloing happening. And that's just from the display. It literally isn't going through like super fine and trying to refine all that stuff. So like I said, that's why you want to look at it at 100% because it always gives you like the best view for that kind of thing. Okay. Okay, so very cool. We've created a couple of different things that we can kind of show off. Now we can also go through and kind of recolor some of these too. I can grab shape layer number 1. There's the color for this one. And just go up to the fill and just give it a different color. There you go. Now it's green. Okay. Oops. I actually want to pick a color based on what I said before, which is going to this and going into like 160. I'm not really a fan of that one. Let me also take the blackness down to maybe 45. There we go. Okay. So now this color here and that color there are mathematically close. Okay. It's not just like a random value I picked out of thin air. They actually are close in there. Okay. And then the next one is this guy. I can go here and I'll go to 260 and I'm actually less desaturation. Let's cut that in half. There we go. Okay, so now I have some colors that are a little bit closer as far as our eye can see to get them to look correct. I also could have gone through, let me just undo my color choices here. There it is. I'm going to go through this one, and I'm just going to take my saturation. Let me see that. Yeah, okay. So it was at 60, so I'm going to make this one 40. And then I'll go to this one. And I'll make that one 80. And I'll go to this one, and I'll make it 100. I'll go to that one, and I'll make it 20. And then the last one I'll leave as is. Okay, so again, all blues kind of related to each other. Okay, so it's not, again, just random colors. I could have done the same thing with the blackness. I could have done the same thing with the hue, creating hues along the same color line. Okay. All right, so that's one of them that we did. Looks wonderful. Okay, I can turn on motion blur too, and that'll give me a little bit of blurriness. It's not going to be too apparent on this just because of how it's moving. It'll be more apparent in the line one than we do next. Okay, so I'm going to label this one circle blips, whatever you want to call them. Okay, save it. Now I'm going to make another new composition. And I'm going to call this one, I'll just label it right here, I'll just call this one lines or star or whatever I'll call it. Okay. So same thing, 960, 540. 30, keeping this at 30, it's just easier for the math. So when we're doing like the time offset, I just subtract 2 and it's right there. And then 5, and then the background is gray. Okay, so now we start off again with a blank canvas. So I'm going to do the similar thing. I'm going to go to my ellipse and double click it. I'm going to go into my settings for the ellipse. And 500, 500, perfect. Now if you do cut this off, if I went to 540 and 540, you can see how the top and the bottom are cut off. If I then went in to scale this, and then I pre-composed it or whatever, it would actually cut it off. So I don't need to show that, but it's there. 500, 500, good, okay. So now I'm going to take this and I want lines to appear. Okay, so I'm just going to label this circle. And then I'm going to go into my pen tool. And with the pen tool, you basically can draw shapes in here as well. Okay, so I just used the pen tool to just draw a straight line. I just held shift, boom, boom, that one's done. And then I can relabel this one line. Okay, now with this, if you look at it, if I went to scaling this and I start to scale it, it's actually scaling the thickness. See how thick it is there and how thin it gets. Okay, because I'm scaling it width-wise and height-wise. So what I'm going to do is just click off the constrain and just scale it in the Y direction. Okay. Now where I drew it was actually kind of important because it's automatically centered on this document. Had I drawn it way off side, let me just click off and just go boom, boom like this. And then I went to scale, turn that off. You can see it doesn't look like it's scaling from the center of that sphere, okay, or the center of the circle. It looks like it's scaling from offside. So when I drew it, I was kind of deliberate in where I put that. Now it's not perfect, okay? You can see that it's not exactly where I want it to be. So if I go into my contents here and I go into my shape, there you go. There's my stroke. I can grab the 2 points for it. There we go. And I can nudge them over. Okay? So I'm just using my arrow keys to nudge this so that it is more centered. Now I can also go under View and turn on rulers, right? Control R. And I can create a guide halfway between it. So if it's 960 going across, halfway would be 480. So if I go to 480 right there, so close, right there, I know that that's the center line. Okay? So that's where I want this thing to be right on top of. There we go. So now that line is perfectly centered on that circle. Okay? And then you'll also see that this line doesn't go right to the bottom of this. And again, I could change that. I can click on the path here, click on the point, and just drag that point down to the center. Okay? Now again, I went past the center, so I need to locate the center of it. So that's why I use my guide. I pull another guide. Vertically, we're at 540, so half of that is 270. So I'm pulling this down to 270, and I'm looking, see my info palette way over there? I'm looking to get that at 270, right there. Okay? So now I can grab this point and hold down Shift and drag it up, and it snaps right to it. Okay?
It was 277.
Was it 277? No, it wasn't, because it says position 270.
Oh.
Yeah. And that's the other way too, is kind of clicking on the point. There we go. And I'm starting to move it, and it'll show you where the point is at. So 480 by -13, wonderful. All right. Okay, so now I can go into my scale, and I'm scaling this right from the center. Okay? So I can do the same thing I did in the other one, which is scale it and just do it in one direction. All right? So I'm going to kind of force it. So what I want to happen is, in this case, my circle kind of expands, and as it expands and scales like that, that's causing these bars to kind of pop up. And they're going to kind of overshoot and then come back to their resting position. And that should create a cool like snake effect on it. Now, in order for me to even see that, you can see that my circle is actually a bit big, right? I'm not even going to see it because my thing is poking past. So I'm going to go to my circle, and I'm going to take my scale down to, I can constrain this now, 300, 350. Okay, we'll take it to 350. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to go to my scale. I'm going to reset this to 0, hit my stopwatch, go up to 15 frames, set it to 100%. Okay, and so now we just have, let me hide my line, I don't need to see that. I'm done with my guide, so I can hide my guides. Okay, so there's my circle, kind of boring. Then I'll go into my graph editor and tweak that. If I see nothing in the graph editor, it's because I don't have anything clicked. So I click something, and it shows the stuff in the graph editor. Okay, so I can pull out handlebars just like you would in Illustrator, Alt, and then dragging it. Okay, maybe I'll pull this one down like that. There we go. That seems a little more forceful. The other one seemed a little soft on the end. It kind of grew and then just scaled really slow at the end. This one, it kind of pops right at the end. There we go. Cool. So now I'm going to go into my lines. Turn my graph off. And these guys are going to start right about there. Okay, so I'm going to set this to 0. I'm going to set my stopwatch. I'm going to go up a couple frames and set this to be maybe, yeah, 100's too much. Let's pull it down. Remember, I wanted to overshoot what I wanted it to do, so I'm going to go to 76, then go up a couple more frames, and then pull it back to like 65. There we go. Okay. All right. Now I don't want the line to show, so I'm going to put that below it. Okay. So now you can see it definitely looks like the line is like popping up and then coming back down. All right, cool. And I don't really even have to touch. These keyframes are so close together that I don't even really need to touch the graph for them. If I have a keyframe here and a keyframe there, and there's only like 2 frames or 3 frames between them, there's not much I'm going to be able to do to actually get any sort of fanciness or anything in there. So I'm just going to ignore any keyframe adjustments on that. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to take that and duplicate it and rotate it. Okay. So I'm going to duplicate it, rotate it 10 degrees. Okay. And look at how, because I centered this, it rotates right from that point. So all it's going to do is just do that all the way around, right? Now, it would be nice in After Effects if they had like a step and repeat where we could just duplicate and do that exact thing. It does not, though. So unfortunately, we just duplicate, hit R, and then we add 10 to that. So do math that you're comfortable with. 40. And you can see how repetitive this is, why we don't want to do this too many times, right? Oops, I hit. R 70. And I'm gonna do it one more time. Duplicate R 80. Okay. So now what I have is I have this thing set up, and they're going around like that. So what I can do is I'm gonna grab all of these, and I'm gonna test it out. So I'm gonna do the same trick. I'm gonna grab the bottom one, shift-click the top one. That's the order I want them to do their stuff in. I'm going to go to Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. Right now they're at 5 seconds going across. How many frames do I want between the first one moving and the second one moving is what I just offset this to. So I would set this to be, let's say, 428. So I get 2 frames. That might be too much. All right, there we go. All right, so now we'll take a look at this and see. Okay. So that doesn't look too bad, right? It looks pretty decent. Bloop. Right. Now, just for fun, let's hit undo. And let's go back to animation, back to keyframe assistant, back to sequence layers, and let's just try 429. All right, different effect, a little bit quicker. Bloop. I can't wait to see it go all the way around. I'm excited. All right, so I want to see what that does. All right, cool. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of these. Okay, I have this chunk, this pie wedge that is good. So what I want to do is I want to duplicate that pie wedge and just rotate it down for each one of those quadrants. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's called pre-composing, and we talked about this in the last one. So if I go to Layer Pre-Compose, I'm going to call this Line Composition. There we go. Okay, so what this will do is it'll take all of these lines and flatten it into one composition and then set it aside. Okay, so now it looks like we're still good. Like, there it is. Everything looks exactly the same. Bloop. There it is. All right, so now what I can do though is that I can duplicate this. So I can just go Control D, go to Rotate, and type in 90, and I'll get the next set. Duplicate it again, rotate, go to 180, because that's 90 plus 90. Duplicate it, rotate it again, go to 270, because that's 90 plus 180. And now we're going to get this. We have to fix it. Okay? It still looks cool. It still looks like something that you definitely could use for something. But for this specific instance, my plan was to have it go all the way around, right? So I want that to go all the way around. I don't want it to do that specific thing. Okay? So here's where I would just offset it. So I would just go to where the end is, right? Right about there. Okay. And then I would just take this one, I would just scoot it down further. I would take that one, I'll just throw these off to the side for now. Okay. Oops, I moved them backwards. This is my first one. This one, then that one, then that one. Okay. Like this. Okay, now you can see this one's a little bit late, right? Because it actually doesn't start moving until about here. So I can just cut this. I can just go like that and then pull it back down. All right, so now I'll test it out and see. There we go, that looks pretty good. And then we'll take this one, do the same thing. Just pull this down until that one lines up. Still a little bit late. There we go, I think a little bit late. So maybe a frame. Cool, and then we'll take this one and pull it down. Oops, I didn't rotate that one back. I did at one point, I think I undid it. There we go. All right, cool. Cool, so that's what I wanted it to happen, okay? So it comes up and blips, and then there it goes. Now I could, awesome, then take these and then pre-compose this. That way everything's kind of nicely together. Line comp 02. Okay, so now everything is together, packaged under that. Now I can get back to any one of these just by double-clicking it. I can double-click this and get back to just the lines. And what's cool about this is that you can focus just on the line work. You don't have to focus in on everything happening. Okay, and that looks cool in itself. And I could actually save that and use that somewhere else, okay, which is really, really awesome. I could double-click one of these and get back to just that quarter view where we just have a quarter of these and say those lines are too thick. Let's take them down to like 6. Even 4, I think would be good. There we go. That's cool there. I could even offset these again. So I could take all of these here, put my cursor back at the beginning, and use my little left clicky thing, the left bracket, and that snaps them all in alignment. Remember they were stair step before, so they were offset. Now they're back in alignment. So now I can just re-click them, go back up here, and do it at 420. Really exaggerate this, 425. Okay, that really slows down. Let's not do it that slow. There's 427. There we go. Okay, so then I would jump back to this one and then just verify that this is still moving correctly, which it's not going to be. But again, that's like another cool way to kind of show that, because there's a lot of cool stuff that we can do with this. It's not just about here's the one way to do it, that's the only way to do it. You really play with this and you experiment and you get these really cool things. If I'm like, hey, that's cool, I like the way that looks, I just come up here to my line composition 2. Where's it at? There it is. 2, and I just duplicate it. There we go. Now I have that one, and I can just call this one rename line composition 3 random, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So now I have that one that's in the wings of my arsenal of tools that I could call upon at any point. My plan still was to create them in order. So again, I just kind of go through, just kind of offset them until they're lined up correctly. Okay, so right about there probably. Okay, and the same thing, just pull this back, pull that one back. And these to come in a little bit sooner. And this one I trimmed so that I only see like the part that starts moving, so I'm gonna do that in this one too. So trim this right there. There we go, and then we wait till this. There it is, starting to move.
Are you holding Alt and bracket when you drag?
No, just dragging. If you drag just this end, it'll just move it.
Okay.
Okay? So you don't need to do anything fancy with that.
Okay.
So now, awesome. So now when I go back to line stars, there it is. Okay? Now what's cool about this too, having everything in one composition, is at any point I could say, this composition is maybe a little bit too slow, right? Because we're already at 4 seconds for this, and my spot that I have for this little blip is only 2 seconds or whatever it is, okay? So I can go to this little bracket thing down here, okay? It's hard to see, but it's like a line and then whatever signs, okay? It's the far right one on the bottom 3. Then I can stretch it. So I can say, make this 50%. Okay, so now it's going to happen a lot quicker. Now again, it's not lined up right because it shrunk the entire thing, but I could always just scoot it down a little bit. Okay, so now that whole animation is now twice as fast. So always think about that, of using this, maybe faster, maybe slower, maybe whatever. I could slow it down too if I made this 200% and really pulled it back. There it goes. Okay, you can see how slow that's going, but it's going okay. All right, so I'm going to leave it at 50 because I think 50 looked good, how quick it was. Okay, maybe even less than that, maybe even like 35. Okay, so that's where it pops up. There we go. Okay, cool. All right, so now I can take this, this, and then I can rotate it at the end. Okay, now you'll notice that it's not going to let me scale this out. So you can see on here, I'm trying to grab this and just move it outward, and it's not going to let me do that because this composition is only so long. So I can go into Line Comp 2, I can go into my composition settings, and I can make it, let's say 8 seconds, then go back to line stars, and now it's going to let me stretch it out. Okay, so now I have a little bit more room to play with, because what's going to happen after the end of this is that, well, number one, those are going away. And then the whole thing just disappears. Okay, so I go back to line comp 2. Again, these are not going to let me stretch it out, so I go back to line composition. I go back to this composition setting. This is not something you typically do. I'm just trying to show you the next step that I could do for this. There we go. So now I just Alt right click or Alt right bracket and then the Alt stretch. I go here, and they're all going to stretch to the end. There we go. So then when I go back to line stars, this lets me stretch it out that far and see everything right there. Okay. So now they all come out like that. Good. Then I'm going to go to my scale, set a keyframe here, go up a little bit, say 110, go up a little bit, 0. Okay, maybe that's a little bit too quick. Let's see. So we go here. Yeah, so let's pull these a little bit further off. There we go. And then as these pop out and then come back in, then I can also do the same thing with this one. I'll come up to this, right there, set a scale key, come into the end, and set that to 0. Okay, so now I've come in and I've gone out with it. Okay, so again, just another cool way that we can do that kind of stuff. I could also take these, let me delete these scale keys at the end, and I could also rotate it. That's what I did in the other one. Okay, so they all come out like that, beautiful. I'll set a rotate keyframe. I'll go up to 3 seconds. I'll spin it around twice. Okay, and this is why the motion blur looks so good. This is what it looks like without motion blur. It just looks kind of boring. It doesn't really look like there's a lot of speed happening into it, even though it's spinning like crazy. Look how fast it's spinning. So if I come over here and I check on motion blur, and I come over here and check on motion blur, you'll see that we actually get the motion blur. Now this one here is, I want this layer to have motion blur. This one is, any layers that have motion blur turned on, do it. Show me the motion blur, okay? Because what would happen is we might have 5 layers that have motion blur, but we don't always need to see it because it's going to slow the station down. So now, okay? And we can pull this in a little bit further maybe and tweak that some. And then maybe we'll add the scale in at the end of this. So I'll add a scale here, put this at 0, go in the middle, maybe make this like 150 to really exaggerate it. Look at that. Okay, and then I'll go to this scale again, and there we go. Click that on, go up a little bit, and that goes back to 0. Okay. Okay, so again, it's just a matter of playing with it and trying to create some like cool effects within your scene. It can be a lot of fun if you just take the time and just kind of play around. Don't take it too seriously in the fact that you're trying to create this really intricate design when you're not ready for an intricate design. The stuff that I've shown up here is pretty simple. Okay, if something isn't working after 5 or 10 minutes, sometimes it's easier just to scrap it and start over than to try to fix it. Like if I were to make a new composition, oops, let me rename this one first. Line star is my last one. So I want to put the blips on at the end so I know which one are my blips. Okay, I'll even put a underscore capital blips. I could even make a folder and drop my final blips into the final blips folder. Okay, that way you know that all of this stuff is just supporting these things. Okay, so if I make a new composition and I drew a circle and I drew it like that, and then I'm like, oh, well, I need to get that centered, and then you're trying to hunt through the menus or you're trying to move this around and you're trying to get it centered but it's not working correctly, sometimes it's easier just to delete that shape layer and then just double click it and then go through those steps for that, okay? Than trying to do whatever. All right, so for this assignment, you're gonna be creating 5 of these different blips. So experiment. use circles, use squares, use triangles, use whatever shapes. Remember that you can go inside of Illustrator and draw stuff and then bring it into After Effects 2. Remember what I said about using the color site 2 to pick out colors if you're not comfortable with color choices. Also use resources like YouTube to go through and find some cool motion graphics type things. Okay, this is really going to be a foundation for a lot of the stuff that you're going to be doing, because even though we're using squares and circles and triangles, there's a lot of times where they'll use specific items like a car or an iPad or whatever. So here's this camera that they're showing. And you can see what they're doing is they're basically creating all these little transitions, the same kind of thing we would be doing with our blips, to create this kind of look for the camera, where they're just moving shapes around in order for this camera to get shaped. Okay, so a lot of it's just a repetitive thing using these same concepts in a different format. All right, any questions before we get started? Okay,